to everybody. Welcome to another The Different News. Today, I have a very interesting information to offer to all of you. Medical writing. I think that's a trending professional career that is being in the hot talks nowadays. And I have a very interesting guest too. So I have Dr. Anand Devasthanam, and I will literally tell you that how our guest today can inspire you and tell you more in details about this medical writing industry and taking it up as a profession. So before I call in my guest, I would like to introduce Dr. Anand. So, Dr. Anand is a part of the medical strategy team at 21 Grams, an advertising agency driven to make healthcare more human. Anand has several years of science communication experience spanning regulatory medical writing, scientific and clinical publications, and HCP focused medical communications. He has considerable experience across a multitude of therapeutic areas, including oncology, immuno-oncology, kidney disease, ophthalmology, and musculoskeletal disease. Prior to beginning his career as a medical strategist, Anand spent 3 years authoring regulatory documents in the oncology space, focusing on both targeted therapies and immune checkpoint based therapies. He has also worked extensively in the clinical publication space, collaborating with key opinion leaders in various therapeutic areas to facilitate the dissemination of key clinical trial data within high impact publications. Anand defines himself as a scientist by training, writer by passion, and storyteller by nature. He is passionate about working with providers, scientists, and creatives to bridge the gap between people and science. So, without any more ado, I will call my guest inside the studio and we will have a wonderful conversation. Welcome, Dr. Anand, and I'm very glad that you accepted my invitation, and thank you so much for being here. And I know that it's a working day for you, and well, it's good morning to you, by the way.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about medical writing.
So, Anand, our audience have already learned about the versatile profile you have created for yourself. So, I have a lot of questions to ask you today because I think it will be a wonderful interaction and learning from you. You being inside the industry and gaining experience through your work. I think it will really inspire people who are looking forward to take up medical writing as a professional career. So, Anand, so can I ask my first question to you?
Sure, absolutely.
So, Anand, what exactly inspired you to pursue a career in medical writing, and how did you get started in this field?
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't know that something called medical writing existed. So it wouldn't be an honest response to say that I've always wanted to be a medical writer, because it was only quite recently that I found out that something like this exists. What I knew was that I really enjoyed communicating science to different types of audiences. And from very early on, I remember as a kid, I used to read a lot of science fiction. And the one thing that struck me about science fiction is that writers use these elaborate, stories and really intricate plots, and somehow squeeze in science in there. So, in addition to reading an exciting novel or reading a really thrilling, gripping story, you're also learning a thing or two about science. And so I felt that was a really interesting way of communicating science to people, to embed the science within stories in order to help um, the brain grasp those scientific concepts better. So I actually thought that maybe someday I might write a science fiction novel myself. So I had an interest in communicating science, and I kept that interest with me when I was training to become a scientist. And it was only when I was roughly about halfway through my PhD program that I realized that there was something called medical writing, because I began reading about careers in science communication, and that's how I stumbled upon this phrase, medical writing. Didn't know what it meant initially, but the more I learned about it, and the more began speaking with medical writers who had been in the field for a few years, the more I began developing a kind of a closeness and affinity to medical writing. So by the time I graduated from my PhD program, I knew that I wanted to begin my career in medical writing because it not only gave me a chance to become a science communicator, which is something that I had wanted for a very long time, but it also gave me a chance to apply the skills that I had learned in grad school. So to me, it came across, as the best of both worlds. I get to communicate science to different types of audiences, and everything that I had learned through years and years of training in graduate school was going to be applied in a positive way.
Thank you, Anand. That was a very candid answer, and it is very interesting to see that how you could what you thought as a child, you could really translate it into your career. And I think this is very important. Like we should do something what we love to do, and I think this is fantastic. So, Anand, like for now, you have gathered a lot of experience in this field. So, can you describe your experience with different types of medical writing, say, for example, or maybe scientific publications? How is your experience?
I think the reason why there are so many different types of medical writing is because there are many different types of audiences who have different needs. If you're performing medical writing for an audience who works within a regulatory agency, who is
Hmm.
responsible for reading the material that you have written and then using that material to arrive at a decision on whether a drug needs to be approved or a device needs to be cleared, that
Hmm.
becomes regulatory medical writing.
Right.
If you're writing to disseminate data from a clinical trial, which will go out to healthcare providers who need to know how a drug has performed in a clinical study, that becomes clinical publication writing. If, on the other hand, you're doing a slightly different flavor of data dissemination, but this time going out to other scientists, that becomes scientific publication type of medical writing. If you're writing for people people such as medical science liaisons who need to interact with doctors and tell them about up and coming therapies, and if you're creating materials which help both healthcare providers as well as patients get information about recent scientific advancements within a specific therapeutic area, that becomes medical affairs type of medical writing. And if you're writing in order to promote a certain product, or if you're writing to sell a certain product and brand it in the right way, position it in the right way for consumers to actually understand the story behind that product, that
Hmm.
becomes advertising and promotional type of medical writing. So the needs of the audience and the decision that the audience need to make after having consumed that material dictates what type of medical writing it is. So to go back to your question on experience with different types of medical writing, during the final year of my grad school, I was involved in a regulatory affairs internship, and that was my first peek into what regulatory medical writing could be all about. And back in the day, remote positions were not as frequent as we see them now.
Right.
Right now, you can have even entry level medical writer positions which are remote. I've seen that happening many times, but this was not
Absolutely.
the case when I began my career. So I didn't have the liberty to pick and choose the type of medical writing that I wanted to be in.
Hmm.
So the strategy that I used was to see what opportunities exist around me and how can I leverage the skills that I already had in order to help me become better able to pursue an opportunity like that. And that's the reason why I began my career in regulatory, since I was involved in a regulatory affairs internship.
Hmm.
Um, and as I just mentioned, it gave me a little bit of a glimpse into
Hmm.
what regulatory medical writing would be all about. So I began my career there. It was, a lot of fun because everything that a medical writer needs to know in terms of how to communicate clearly, how to write in a way to save the reader time, how to write in a way to present the most important information up front, and also how to get a sense of which information to present and which information to exclude. Again, in
Right.
order to make the most to help give the reader the most valuable reading experience, the basic building blocks of medical writing I picked up during my very first role. Um, and moving on subsequently to my second role in clinical publications and scientific publications, I was playing a little bit more of an overseeing role. I was
Mm-hmm.
managing freelance medical writers, and helping companies produce high quality medical publications and clinical publications. So that was an interesting experience as well. So there, the audience was other healthcare providers, not regulatory this time, but other healthcare providers and other scientists. And in my most recent role, which is in advertising, the audience is a combination of healthcare providers as well as the general public. So I feel like there are certain differences and commonalities between all these different experiences.
Correct.
Differences are the differing needs of the audience
Mm.
and exactly how we go about developing material to get those audiences to take specific actions after having read the material. That's an important point to mention about medical writing, actually, which is that there always has to be an action item in any medical writing piece. Medical writing is not about entertaining the audience, it's about giving the audience information to help them make a decision. Okay. But the one common thread that I've had in all these different types of roles is that you're communicating science to an audience who has either more scientific knowledge than you, or equivalent amount of scientific knowledge compared to you, or less amount of scientific knowledge compared to you. And so understanding the needs of the audience and communicating science to them, translating the language of science to a language that anyone else can understand, is the one common theme which kind of connects all these different experiences in my career.
Thank you, Anand. I think you have really put forward the entire scenario in a very simple way. And I think whoever is listening or who will be listening to this video later in the recorded version, I think for new beginners, it will be a fantastic, eye-opening session. So, well, when it comes to writing, and particularly medical writing or any writing per se, there are two three aspects, like it's the particularly it's whether it is accurate and whether it is clear. So how do you ensure that your writing is accurate, clear and concise, while also meeting the needs of your target audience, as you already mentioned about, I mean, you highlighted that point. So how exactly do you ensure all these aspects?
Well, if you're working on your own, then it's very important to make sure that you're getting the appropriate level of feedback.
Correct.
So a freelance medical writer, for instance, who is the only person working in that company, it's essentially a sole proprietorship in
Mm-hmm.
freelance medical writing. So if the medical writer is working on their own, then it's important to rely on their experience, maybe have the piece reviewed by someone they trust, a
Mm.
different writer perhaps, and be extremely open to any kind of criticism or feedback that comes in
Mm.
order to make that piece better.
Correct.
So making it more clear and making it better and making it exactly reach the needs of the audiences is reliant extremely on feedback. And there's a phrase, there's a saying that goes, feedback is the breakfast of champions. Okay, and that's
Awesome.
very very relevant to medical writing, it because it's like the most important meal of the workday, because feedback
Correct.
is essentially an opportunity for growth. For medical writers like myself who are working in a company,
Mm-hmm.
nothing goes out without it being looked at and reviewed by other team members. And so people with different types of experiences and different types of past experiences come and look at the writing that we've done and provide the suggestions on how to improve it, how to make it better.
Right.
And this helps a lot because, let's say for instance, I write something and I hand it over to you. You
Mm-hmm.
might be coming in with a different background and you might say, I worked with a client X number of years ago who felt that phrasing something slightly different or presenting information in a slightly different way was more efficient to them, so perhaps you can use that here.
Correct.
So it's really relying on everyone's experience and working as a team in order to make
Mm.
make things better. It really takes teamwork to make the dream work. So
Absolutely.
again, and
Absolutely.
medical writing, just like in science, uh,
Mm-hmm.
in today's day and age, there is no such thing as an independent scientist who doesn't collaborate with anyone, because in order to do successful science, collaboration is key.
Absolutely.
So the same is true with successful medical writing as well. Sure, you can go. you can reach certain heights, you can make a good level of progress by yourself,
Mm.
but when you do it together as a team, the quality of the output is just magnified manifold.
Right, right. Thank you, Anand, for explaining that. And what techniques do you use to research and gather information for your writing projects, and how do you evaluate the quality and reliability of your sources?
Well, so I can tell you, I mean, I can answer the question based on the different types of experiences I've had. So the thing about medical writing is that when we produce something, some of the information is provided to us by the person we're writing for. Like, for instance, if I'm helping a company to write something, many of the
Yes.
resources might be given to me by the company itself. And
Okay.
I also have to rely on, publicly available knowledge and publicly available sources in order to fill in the gaps and ensure that I have all the information I need.
Mm.
When I was freelancing, I was actually freelancing when I was still in grad school, freelancing part time.
Okay.
There, I was relying mostly on publicly available information.
Mm.
And so there's a certain hierarchy of information. So if something is published in, let's say, a randomized clinical trial, that is
Mm.
considered the highest, most purest form of data that you can get because that clinical trial is so well controlled.
Yes.
And then you have a well controlled scientific study as something which is slightly below on that same hierarchy of validity, so to speak.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And then you have um, any other form of peer reviewed literature such as reviews,
Mm.
and then you have non peer reviewed literature, and then you have press releases, and then you have blogs,
Right.
and then you have YouTube comments. So there's a certain hierarchy of how truthful information is and how much you can rely on it in order to base your work on.
Mm. Mm.
So as long as you keep this hierarchy in mind and make sure that you're only getting information from sources which are well controlled and sources which have been published in a peer reviewed manner,
Right.
then it helps a lot in making sure that the information is valid and the information is accurate. So for instance, if we can get information from a clinical trial paper and get that same information from a blog or a press release, we would prefer to get the information from the clinical trial paper and cite that clinical trial paper when developing material. So it's essentially a matter of understanding the hierarchy,
Mm.
getting a sense of where you can get information from. So that's how external publicly publicly available information works. As far as information given to us by other organizations, we really don't have a say in whether or not that information is true or not. We accept it as being true, and we work
Right.
off of their suggestions and recommendations.
Mm. 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 Thank you, Anand, for that answer. Well, when it comes to science communication or medical communication or medical writing per se, it is very important that we keep ourselves very knowledgeable in terms of current trends or uh, particularly remaining up to date. So, how do you stay up to date with the latest developments in your area of specialization, and what are the resources you generally prefer to rely on or for the professional development uh, for yourself?
So the two organizations that I have been following for the past few years is the American Medical Writers Association,
Okay.
AMWA, and the European Medical Writers Association, EMWA. Um, the two things that I appreciate about both these organizations is that, first off, they're widely recognized in industry.
Mm.
So people who have been in the medical writing field for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and been very successful in industry are also members of such organizations. And they often contribute articles and they present their opinions at conferences hosted by these organizations. And so it's a great place to go to find out what's happening at the leading edge of medical
Mm-hmm.
writing, how recent events are shaping medical writing. Um, some of the recent topics include how the pandemic has impacted the medical writing world, both from a financial standpoint as well as how medical writers need to quickly read up on virology and things like that in order to begin contributing to material that helps people understand the consequences of the pandemic. That's one huge change. Second is, I know that in the United States, cannabis is being legalized in many states,
Yes.
and so how medical writers talk about that and how medical writers can help companies to to establish themselves as market leaders in that space is also an up and coming issue. And the third is, of course, something like artificial intelligence and
Yes.
how that can contribute to quicker turnarounds for medical writing documents, and the extent to which someone can use artificial intelligence in order to produce meaningful material
Mm.
is a hot topic of discussion. So, like this, there are many other topics at the leading edge of medical writing which are discussed on by these organizations at annual conferences.
Mm.
So I've been in touch with these organizations, and I also subscribe um, to their newsletters and their journals in order to
Right.
get a sense of what's going on in the field. So it's exactly like in science, you have to read journal articles in order to find out what's
Right.
going on in the field. And the same is true with medical writing as well. And we're very lucky that an organization such as the American Medical Writers Association exists,
Mm.
has committed itself to providing that kind of information and helping writers stay informed about what's going on in the medical writing world.
Yes, thank you, Anand, for sharing the information about the associations, because I think many people can look up to these associations and they can benefit from the information they share and keep them updated, like you also do for yourself. So, well, it's all about collaboration and teamwork, as you already mentioned, when it comes to good medical writing work. So, can you walk us through a process of how exactly we can work as a team of scientists, physicians, or any other stakeholders who would be to just to make up one piece of medical content. So basically what I'm trying to say is that can you tell us what are the good ways of collaborating? I mean, that is very important.
Sure. Um, I think there were two questions in there. One, the second was about collaboration, and the first one was about the process itself.
Process. Yes.
So let me answer the process question first. So
Mm-hmm.
there is, there's a certain hierarchy as well as far as information dissemination is concerned. At the top, and I like to think of it as a pyramid. So at the top of the pyramid is vision. One step below is strategy. One step below is implementation, and at the bottom is quality control. So these four steps are key in order to produce any good medical writing output. So it begins with a vision. So the first step in any medical writing project is to ask questions about where this project is headed. What is the eventual goal? What vision do we have for the project? How is this going to change perceptions in people's minds? Because if you want to change the world, you have to change people's minds first. And writing is a way of changing people's minds.
Absolutely.
So vision is key in order to understand the vision. Many projects begin without a good sense of vision, and those usually take longer to complete. The process becomes a little more messy, and collaborations can sometimes turn sour because people might have different visions as the project proceeds. So it's very important to establish the vision for the project. Where do you see it going? Where would the final thing that we produce, where will it live? Will it be on a website? Is it a book? Is it a paper? Is it free for all? Do they have to pay for it? So, vision, where does it live and what does the ultimate product look like? That's key. The second step is strategy, which means discussions around how do we get there. What would be the key two or three important messages that we need to include in order to satisfy this vision that we've put together? So, that's strategy, long term planning. The next step is implementation. Once we have the vision and strategy in place, it's time to get down to the writing. And this is an important point because most people feel like writing is the first step. It's not. Writing is step number three because step number one is Vision, step number two, is strategy. Writing is always step number three. It's important to plan before you write. So that's where implementation comes in, the writing component. And finally, quality control, to ensure that the formatting is good, to ensure that it's meeting the standards of the people who you'll be presenting it to, in order to ensure that everything is consistent, to make sure that everything is packaged properly. So those are that would say that I would say is an overview of what the process looks like. And this is true regardless of the type of medical writing project, or regardless of the genre or flavor of medical writing you're working within. These four steps are absolutely key. The second half of your question was about collaboration.
Yeah.
So, as far as collaborations are concerned, it depends on the context. Sometimes collaborations are um, deliberate, where you feel like you've reached the edge of your knowledge and you might want to collaborate with someone in order to bring in their expertise.
Hmm.
So that type of collaboration really depends on the level of professional chemistry you might have with someone.
Correct.
So those types of collaborations are collaborations which you can initiate on your own, self-initiated collaborations.
Hmm. Hmm.
The second type of collaboration within medical writing is when you're working within a company and you're expected to function within a team. That too is an example of a collaboration. So when that happens, it's extremely important to recognize that the voice of the team is more important than the voice of any one specific individual. And so it's very important to kind of hold back and tune into what the team is saying, tune into the voice of the team, tune into
Right.
the tone, read the situation, read the room, read the environment, and get
Hmm.
a sense of how you can you know present your ideas in a well informed and humble way, and sell your ideas to the team first, because that's when your ideas might get implemented and make it into the final product. So those are two different examples of collaborations.
Thank you, Anand. It's very crystal clear, and I think it's a very good way if somebody is it's a beginner in these stages, because I think the main challenges come when you start something and you are not very aware of the path. So, with that context, definitely I know that you have traversed quite a path, and you might have faced challenges as well. So, what challenges have you encountered while working on these medical writing projects, and how have you addressed them?
Well, I think my first challenge was to enter the industry itself,
Okay.
because I'd never had the title of medical writer before.
Hmm.
Okay. And this was a difficulty for me, but it's no longer a difficulty, because medical writing is now a bigger field, and I feel like the medical writing community is now a little bit more open to hiring someone who has very little medical writing experience, and bring them into an entry level position and then train them from there. I see those things happening now. But
Mm.
a few years ago, when I began my career, there was the catch 22 of if you want experience, you need to have experience first. That catch
Mhm.
22 was a lot more prominent and a lot stronger. So it was just very pronounced in um, interviews and screening calls and those kinds of things, where I would say, I don't have medical writing experience before, in the past, but I know what this field is all about, and I've done my homework about this field, and I'd like to become a medical writer, and I'd like to grow as a medical writer. It was a long shot. It took me a long time to convince people across the table that I
Correct.
truly did want to be a medical writer. But it's not as difficult now as it
Correct.
was back then, because I feel like the industry is responding really well to people with both scientific and non-scientific backgrounds
Mm.
who want to make a transition into medical writing. So that was, I would say, the first challenge.
Mm.
As far as other challenges are concerned, every single opportunity that I've been in has come with its own set of challenges, and I'll just briefly go over them. So with my very first role in regulatory, the challenge was to get a sense of what these regulations were and how they relate to the specific project. And also, it was the first time where I was just thrown into the world of multitasking. Because in grad school, I spent 6 years working on one project.
Correct.
All that boils into one thesis,
Mm-hmm.
and all that boils down to one degree. It's
Right.
extremely unilateral. Okay. So, but then again, with my first role in the regulatory space, I had
Mm-hmm.
to manage. In my first year, it was like 6 projects, and by the time I was in my third year in the organization, I was handling about 27 projects.
Oh my God.
So it's just a lot of multitasking, and you have to push the needle a little bit on every single project every day.
Correct.
So using every little bit of time that you have in order to see, okay, what's going on with this project, that project, that
Mm.
project, and find out what can you do, because some projects go on pause for a while, but that doesn't mean that I should go on pause. It means that I should divert my time and focus on projects which require a little bit more attention, which are a little bit more fast paced. And then that fast paced project might slow down a bit. That doesn't mean I need to slow down. That means I need to babysit the other projects and find out, okay, what else is going on with these projects and what can I be doing in order to progress those projects a little bit more. So multitasking, I think, was a little bit of a challenge which I had to learn. That was the
Okay.
first challenge with the first role. With my second role, it was my very first role where I was managing people and I was
Mm.
managing a team. So team skills, people skills, leadership skills. I mean, I had some idea of what these might be, but it's only when I was immersed in that environment that I learned, how to manage people, how to manage teams, and how to get people to commit to a specific vision and then work toward that specific vision.
Right.
And with my most recent role, it was my first role within strategy, within medical strategy, so to speak. So, putting on a strategy hat and learning to think strategically was, I would say, something that needed, time and effort.
Mm.
The thing about strategy is that there's a lot of reading and thinking involved to get a sense of what the market looks like, to get a sense of market dynamics, and to get a sense of what a specific therapeutic landscape looks like. Coming in as a medical writer, I always had something to show each week,
Mm.
because each week when I was a medical writer, I would meet with my manager, and my manager would say, what have you achieved this week? And I could point to specific things that I had done on a spreadsheet and say, this is what I accomplished this week, and this is what I accomplished last week. In a strategy role, however, the deliverables and what needed to be delivered were not as short term, because in strategy we do a whole lot of thinking and we pack in all that thinking into something that needs to be delivered in like a month or two. Okay. And so my manager would ask me, what have you accomplished this week?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then I would say, well, I had some thoughts this week. Was very intimidating and very daunting to say, because I couldn't point at something and say, this is what I did.
Right.
So that was a challenge with this with the strategy role.
Mm.
Different challenges at different in different chapters of my career.
Wonderful. I mean, that's a, all added spices, and you are, you are now a good cooked food, I must say. So I think that is how I can put across. So I think, Anand, when you talk about writing and also medical writing, per se, or like you said, that multitasking. So I think there is a lot of balance which is required. So how do you balance the need for scientific rigor with the need to communicate complex medical concepts to non-expert audience?
Well, so there's a really interesting saying that goes that in good science writing is about um, simplifying the writing without simplifying the science, because our role really is to simplify the writing. If you
Hmm.
try to simplify the science, it results in dilution of that science. It results in uh, the undermining of scientific efforts.
Correct.
And so it's crucial that we simplify the writing as opposed to simplifying the science. So as I mentioned earlier, we there is no such thing as a perfect first draft. The first draft is always messy, regardless of how much experience someone has had.
True.
So it's important to allow ourselves to create a first draft which we know is needs to be shaped and needs to be sculpted in a way in order to get it to meet the needs of the audience. And so the first draft might be something which is quite scientific sounding,
Mm-hmm.
and then we work on it, we collaborate with team members, and we try to get a sense of how can we simplify the writing without simplifying the science,
Mm.
communicate the same scientific concept to an audience. We might end up adding half a page, we might end up adding a couple more slides to a deck,
Mm-hmm.
might end up changing the look and feel of a project altogether. I mean, if it was supposed to be a one page write up, we might decide at some point that maybe this can be an infographic in addition to this write up in order to convey the same information. Maybe we can take an abstract and also create a graphical abstract so that
Mm.
scientists can read the abstract, and people with not as much scientific information will gravitate toward the graphical abstract so they can also get these concepts and understand what's going on. So it's kind of the play and balance of these things which happens in a collaborative environment, which helps us meet the needs of audiences. Um, and I think that also partially answers your question about scientific rigor, because it always begins with creating something which is scientifically rigorous, and then finding a way of simplifying the communication, maybe adding a visual component, maybe adding a few quotes from opinion leaders, or anything else that can be done in order
Mm.
to simplify the communication aspect.
Thank you, Anand. I know it's a working day for you, but I think we are so engrossed in this conversation. So, as I say, that I have a long list of questions, but we are almost at the concluding part of our conversation, and I will not hold you for many more long time now. But then, I'd also like to understand from you that how, like, can you describe a particularly successful project you worked on, and what made it successful? Give that tag of it's a successful project. Can you tell us something about this?
Sure, absolutely. So there's actually a disease called acute T cell lymphoma, which
Okay.
impacts not only adults but children as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's um, well, it's not as new now, but back then it was a very new type of therapy called CAR T cell therapy,
Right.
which can be used to treat this indication,
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
oncological indication. And
Mm-hmm.
so we were developing um, clinical protocols and some other regulatory documents to go into the regulatory dossier, which is essentially the collection of regulatory documents which needs to be submitted to the FDA.
Okay.
And so it was a, I would say, a revolutionary type of therapy. Nothing like that had
Yes.
been done before. Also a very expensive type of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we looked at clinical trials. There were very few clinical trials, and even those clinical trials had few numbers of patients. Again, because of the cost and because of the complexity of the treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And so we looked at all that information and wrote the regulatory documents required in order to approve that therapy. And so submitting it to them and finding out that the therapy was going to be approved, and finding out that patients who could not get any other form of treatment could get this treatment because of the approval was a very, very empowering feeling. And I know that there were hundreds of people involved in that project across
Correct.
probably dozens of organizations. And as a medical writer, I was probably, just the smallest puzzle piece of that
Mm-hmm.
entire picture. But still, there was a sense of pride and ownership, even though I
Absolutely.
done my very small role in that, in order to give hope essentially to someone who had almost lost hope, and because of that therapy being
Hmm.
approved, they could be hopeful again to live
Ab-
longer. And
it's a
so that
very
was a very empowering thing, and I often think about that moment.
good. Mm-hmm.
I've thought about that moment many times in my career.
This is awesome. This is awesome. So, Anand, finally, to coming to the last question, and what advice would you give to someone who is interested in pursuing a career in medical writing, and what qualities do you think are essential for success in this field?
So in terms of what you can begin doing for someone who is yet to enter the medical writing world, I think the curiosity is key. You have to be curious about what the medical writing field is all about. You know, and don't leap at finding jobs right away until you have done your homework, because you might see four different job descriptions, and they all say medical writer, but then the job descriptions seem like completely different roles. And that's how much medical writing has expanded. There are so many different types. And so the first thing I would say is to start reading about the different types of medical writing. Go on, look, read blogs, read up on LinkedIn, connect with medical writers, look at medical writing on YouTube, and find out as much as you can about the different types of medical writing. Because it's only when you do this research do you get a sense of what type of medical writing you might resonate with the strongest. You don't want to end up transitioning into one type of medical writing and then decide that you should have transitioned into something else to begin with. I mean, not that you can't change. You can always transition into one type of medical writing and make a shift, but it's that shift comes with its own challenges, and so you don't want to set yourself up with additional challenges because transitioning itself could be a little bit of a challenge. So I think homework is key, and this is something which requires time and patience. You know, so the first piece of advice is don't begin applying for roles until you've done your homework. Excuse me. And the second piece is, um, I think the second part of your question was, can you remind me what the second part of your question was? The first was about,
It was like, what skills do you think, or what qualities do you think
oh
one
yeah,
should
skills and
gather,
qualities.
yeah, to step into this career?
Well, it's important to be open to feedback. It's important to enjoy the writing process, and it doesn't have to be medical writing specifically. If you enjoy writing in general,
Hmm.
then you will probably find a medical writing career very fulfilling. So having a joy for writing, feeling a sense of accomplishment and joy when you write something, um, being open to feedback, open to improvement, willing to work in a team, because even if you're a freelance medical writer working on your own,
Mm-hmm.
there is a strong sense of collaboration with the person you're developing the document for.
Absolutely.
It's not a situation where they tell you what you want and then it's not like ordering food where they pick something off the menu and then you make it, you give it to them, and that's the end of the story. It doesn't happen like that. It's a very collaborative process. Sure, they tell you what they want, but then you create a storyline first, you create a framework, you have that framework reviewed, you fill in the blanks a little bit, you do an interim review, you fill in the blanks a little bit more, you do a final review. And so it's a very collaborative process, and so being open to feedback and open to collaboration is also a very important quality. I think that pretty much sums it up. Those qualities are um, pretty much the I would say the top ones in order to succeed in medical writing.
So Anand, just thank you so much for this advice, and I think you have very well pointed down the key points and highlighted what exactly is needed, or how the person should understand themselves before even they step or think to step into this career. So I think you run a YouTube channel of your own. So can you just tell what that channel is named as, and how can people access that channel?
Sure, sure. So if you just go to YouTube and type in my name, it's going to lead you straight to the channel. The channel is about medical writing, but it doesn't have like an academic slant, and it doesn't have kind of a lectureship slant to it. So it's not me standing and talking to you about what medical writing is. Instead, it's about me talking to you about the day in the life of a medical writer. you know Triumphs, successes, struggles, difficulties, challenges that medical writers go through. These are some things that I talk about. The videos that I make are maybe 3 to 5 minutes in length, so not too big. And they essentially all follow the same theme, which is what it feels like to be a medical writer.
Fantastic.
So I would encourage you to go and have a look, um, and let me know what you think.
And obviously I think now once we have this live ended session ended here, so if you can share your YouTube link, I can put in the description of this particular video, which will help others, interested people to go. And everybody who are listening with us right now, who have joined us, thank you so much for staying till the end. And I hope you all had a great meal of information regarding medical writing, or the qualities that is required, the challenges that might crop up, and most importantly, the qualities, the skills that you need to understand before even you step inside this field. So thank you, Anand, for your time, and sorry that I held you up for a little longer, but it was wonderful talking to you, and I hope we will continue our conversations in the near future as well.
Likewise, thank you so much for the conversation. It was a lot of fun being here, and I thoroughly enjoyed answering all your questions. And as you said, I certainly hope that the audience found value in this conversation.
Absolutely. I'm very sure about it. Thank you, Anand. Stay in touch. Take care. Bye bye. Bye bye, everybody. Good night. Take care.